What's going on, Fantasy Champs? Thank you so much for checking us out on YouTube. Today, we're going to talk about our top 5 bold predictions for the 2024 fantasy football season. Way too early, I know. Be sure to check that out. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Here comes the episode.
Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs? What a wild weekend it was for the NFL. A wild weekend. As you can see, I'm by myself. Rick is taking a short leave of absence. I should say. And he will not be here for probably the next month or so. So it's me. It's you. We're going to break down fantasy football together. It should be interesting. Should be fun. But this weekend was wild. Wild. We had some wild card. That was totally unintentional. Now you just clicked out of the video because you were like, this moron just made a stupid joke. No, wild card weekend, super wild card weekend, as they like to call it, which is now just wild card weekend. Why are we calling it a super wild card weekend? Doesn't make any sense. But it was wild. Eagles lost to the Buccaneers last night, 32-9. The Lions won a playoff game for the first time since the 90s, early 90s, I think. The Cowboys got knocked off by the Packers 48-32. So both the big NFC East teams that were supposed to make a run and be the team with the 49ers to go to the Super Bowl, both those teams are now out of it in the wild card round. The freaking Cowboys losing is hilarious, by the way, just because everyone thought it was their year, and they come out and they choke to the Packers. We saw the Texans come out and absolutely slam the Browns directly into the ground. And Stroud, Stroud's having a moment. Keep an eye on it. Keep watching, guys, because Stroud is having a freaking moment. Chiefs beat the Dolphins in the frigid cold. Bills beat the Steelers in the snow, kind of. They postponed the game when they didn't need to. So lots of wild things happening on Wild Card Weekend. Obviously, as the playoff picture kind of plays itself out, we'll keep you updated as to what's going on. Maybe I'll make some predictions for next week's games because I don't know what the next games are. I mean, what's the schedule, guys? Keep me a front to the schedule. The next episode I'll do this week, I will go through not the wild card weekend scores, but the divisional playoff round, which I have right here. It looks like Saturday at 4:30, Texans at Ravens. Saturday, 8:15, Packers, 49ers. We got Sunday, 3 o'clock, Buccaneers, Lions. Sunday, 6:30, Chiefs, Bills. So the Chiefs, Bills is the last game of the week. I'm rooting for you, Bills. Come on. Beat the Chiefs. Should be an interesting weekend of football. I will make predictions on this later on. Not in this episode, but in an episode further along this week. But today, as I said in the intro, we're going to talk about 5 guaranteed to be right predictions for the 2024 fantasy football season. It's going to get crazy because this is like guaranteed to be right. These are predictions that should be right at the end of the season next year. I should look back on this video and it should be correctly predicted, which I'm elated about. So it should be interesting. If you're listening on a podcast, I want to say subscribe. Be sure to leave a review. The YouTube people already got their introduction. So let's jump right into our top 5 predictions. On Thursday's show, I will do some updates on what has been happening around the league. Obviously, Bill Belichick was fired, and he has been interviewed by the Atlanta Falcons. Patriots subsequently hired Gerard Mayo as their new head coach. So lots of stuff going on around the league, not related to playoff football. But we haven't had Mike McCarthy get fired yet. I thought that would be a bona fide definite on a Tuesday afternoon here, and it hasn't happened yet. But anyway, let's talk about those top 5 guaranteed to be right predictions. Guaranteed. This is a guarantee, stamp of approval, 100%. Get your money back that you didn't pay for, guarantee. Now let's kick it off with number 1. Rashee Rice, baby. I had to put him on the list. He's going to be a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy football next year. What Rashee Rice, I just want to, let's start with the playoff game first for the Chiefs. Rashee Rice in this game, my goodness, did he have a good game. He almost caught 3 touchdown passes. Almost. He had 1 touchdown pass in the game, 1 touchdown catch in the game, 8 receptions on 12 targets for 130 yards. So he isn't the explosive, like huge, big time receiver that Tyreek Hill was, where Hill would catch 3 passes for 175 yards and 2 touchdowns, and everyone would be like, what the frig just happened? He's more of a consistent guy that gets 12, 13. He's going to be a guy that gets 12, 13 targets a game, but he had 12 targets, 130 yards, 1 touchdown. I mean, this is the volume that you're looking to have as you're going along in fantasy football. And I think this is going to be one of the hottest commodities in fantasy football as we go into this year. But the big thing for Rashee Rice that I think you want to look at is he was wide receiver 21 on the season this year, but didn't really start breaking out until around week 12. And he had a similar breakout to Amon-Ra, and I would say play style wise, he's kind of in that boat as well. From weeks 12 to 17, Rashee Rice fell into the number 4 wide receiver in fantasy football. And so finally the Chiefs have found a receiver that could possibly be a dude in their offense that is fantasy relevant, because the last couple of years people have been cadoodling themselves with Hardman and Juju and MVS and whoever else, like, who's that guy, Kadarius Toney, and just a lot of dudes who have not panned out. Rashee Rice looks like a dude that has panned out in his rookie year. Had a second half of the season breakout here with an average of 18.5 fantasy points per game, which ranks, I believe, 5th in fantasy football in that time, or 6th in fantasy football in that time. He is going to be a very, very good receiver for fantasy football. I think it's going to be more like a volume play more than anything, where, Mahomes obviously throws it 40 times a game. They're obviously going to get it to Rashee Rice 10, 11, 12 times a game, especially if Travis Kelce starts to fade like we've been seeing lately. Rashee Rice is going to be the main featured guy that is going to be targeted in this offense, and that's a guy that you want going into 2024. So top 12 to me is kind of an easy out. I mean, what are we doing? So get Rashee Rice on your team for 2024. It's going to be one of the hottest commodities coming out of this season. But number 2 on the top 5 predictions, guaranteed to be right, by the way. Number 2, CMC will finish as will be drafted, as the RB1 off the board again. I don't want to, I personally, for fantasy football purposes, I'm not entirely sure what to do with CMC going into next year, because obviously he was fantastic. In PPR leagues, he was the RB1 by a 130 point margin. He had 391 fantasy points. The RB2 Travis Etienne through 17 weeks had 268 fantasy points. So the next closest guy to Christian McCaffrey was 130-something fantasy points away, or 120-something fantasy points away from CMC. CMC was an absolute machine the entire season, and there isn't another running. When CMC is done, I don't know who's going to take his place, because everyone's just going to score 260 fantasy points. It's going to be a friggin' mid-wash over here at the running back position. It's why I'm pivoting my strategy, by the way. But I am nervous about CMC because he is kind of getting on the older side for running backs. Usually running backs for fantasy football start to fade out around age 28. He is currently at age 27.6. So, like, can he continue to run at the pace and score fantasy points at the pace that he has been producing at? Like, I don't know. I don't think that's the case. But even if the dude regresses 100 fantasy points, he's still going to be a top 3 running back next year, like, easy. And so he'll probably be a guy that I draft, but this guy, not only will he be the first running back off the board, he could very well be the RB1. I mean, the first player off the board overall in just generic PPR leagues. He scored 20-something more fantasy points than CeeDee Lamb, and the advantage that gives you at the running back position over other teams is just absolutely asinine. CMC is what he did this year is absolutely crazy. I did want to look at previous years because, like I said, the bell cow workhorse running back thing, not a thing really in the NFL anymore. But in 2022, the RB1 finished with 372. That was Austin Eckler. McCaffrey finished with 356, and Josh Jacobs finished with 328. We had 4 players finish in the 300s last year. This year, we had 1 player finish at 300. 2021, Jonathan Taylor had 373, so that's 20 points below Christian McCaffrey. 2020, 377 for Kamara. 2019, 471 for Christian McCaffrey. So Christian McCaffrey holds the ball smashing record over there. 2018, Saquon had 385. 2017, 383 for Todd Gurley. And then 2016, going all the way back to that day, 407 for David Johnson way back in the past. So 391 in the modern age is really good, considering that through 17 weeks of fantasy football, the second guy that finished was 268. But CMC, I think, is a lock to finish, or not finish, is a lock to go off the board in your drafts and redraft as the number 1 running back. There's not another guy that I would say should go ahead of them. I think there's some guys that could challenge him. Jahmyr Gibbs from the Lions could be one of those guys. Hot take, I know. This is a show for hot takes, I guess, but CMC, just, there's no other player that can do the things that he does at this point in the league. And I think fantasy football wise, especially the way the 49ers use him and the way they play the game, and if they lose like a Debo or Brandon Ayuk in the offseason, the 49ers could be in one of those positions where CMC gets more work next year. So CMC's an interesting guy, but he's definitely going to go off the board as the RB1. That is not a hot take, but that is a guaranteed 100% stamp of approval prediction. Obviously, unless he gets hurt, because that would be bad. Jahmyr Gibbs, speaking of, will be a first-round pick in your drafts. Now, there were points where Jahmyr Gibbs was really good, and there were points where Jahmyr Gibbs was disappointing. He started off the season 8, 12, 9, 9, and then had 2 weeks where he missed time in weeks 5 and 6. And in that stretch of time, he was brutal. It was bad. You thought he was going to kind of fall out of it and not be the guy that you wanted him to be. But then from week 7 all the way to 17, he had a bad week. But from weeks 7 to 17, this dude went off. And he ended up as the RB3 in fantasy football. So I think this is going to be one of the bona fide locks in the first round. I would be surprised if Jahmyr Gibbs does not jump into the first round, because I do think that the ceiling is really high for him. If he, right now this season, with the first 6 weeks of the season being the way that they were, he still didn't, he still finished he missed 2 weeks in the NFL season. He had 8, 12, 9, and 9, and then 2 weeks off in that first 7 weeks of the season, or 6 weeks of the season. Like, obviously, not good things from Jahmyr Gibbs at that point, but the way he went off in the second half of the season, if he had done it for the whole season and averaged 16 points a game in that stretch, you're talking about a dude that probably finishes at RB5 or RB4 in fantasy football, just based on averages on the season, raw average totals, not including guys that just played a couple of games. Like Devin Achane's on this list at 5. Jahmyr Gibbs was 7 in average points per game. Achane, busted in some of the games that he did play. He had that 51-point game that weighted the averages. So I would say that Gibbs is probably 6 or 5. But Travis Etienne, RB2 on the season through 17 weeks, had 16.8 points per game. Jahmyr Gibbs had 16.7. So very interesting player. Very interesting season. But I do think that at the end of the day, when you hit your drafts, Jahmyr Gibbs is probably going to cost you a first-round pick. I'd love for him to not be a first-round pick because you could get a big-time wide receiver in the first round and then follow it up with a bona fide lock of a top 12 running back in Jahmyr Gibbs. But it's exciting to see what he can do because we've all talked about him being the light version of Alvin Kamara, and he has kind of been that on the season. In terms of target share and in terms of the percentages that he's put out, 51% opportunity share, 220 weighted opportunities. He had 71 targets on the season and caught, how many passes did you catch, my guy? 52 passes he caught. So he's in that threshold, and he missed 2 games, and the first 4 games the season didn't really do anything. So like I could see this guy catching 70 to possibly 80 catches a season, which makes him a bona fide top 5 running back in fantasy football to me. So he's gonna be ranked highly for me. I'm excited to see what he does in 24, but Jahmyr Gibbs will be a first round pick. Number 4, going a little outside of the scope. A little outside of the scope here of fantasy football, just. But T. Higgins is number 4. T. Higgins is not going to be a Bengal in 2024. There have been rumors floating around the rumor mill that obviously the Bengals can tag him, and that could very well be a possibility. But there are rumors floating around that T. Higgins is going to either be traded via the franchise tag or he will be let go in free agency in a stacked free agent class at the wide receiver position, I might add. And there could be some big factors involved in that. But, we'll get into the offseason. As we get into the offseason, we start talking about free agency, which happens, I think, at the beginning of March, which is only a month and a half away. So we'll be talking about, where T. Higgins could be finishing and all of that stuff as we get closer to that time. But yeah, I'm going to look up some information right now and kind of give you some insight into T. Higgins and his future and what they think he's going to be. But there's just been a lot of rumors floating around about what the speculation is for him. He says that the Bengals are still his number 1 option. I just don't know if he's going to resign. You have Jamar Chase there, who is arguably one of the best wide receivers. He is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He has an argument to be the number 1 wide receiver in all the league, and you're going to have to pay him. You have to, Burrow, I think you already paid. And it's like paying Burrow, paying Jamar Chase on your offense, and also keeping your offensive line together. You can't give T. Higgins what he is going to demand in free agency. So unless they franchise tag him this year, I don't see T. Higgins returning to Cincinnati. Like I said, we'll talk about landing spots in the future. I could see Kansas City being one of those spots that he ends up. There are a lot of teams with receivers with receiver needs out there. I could see the New England Patriots going after a guy like T. Higgins to put with the new quarterback that they draft or somebody of that sort so they can start building the offense around that dude. But it should be interesting to see how things kind of, pan out in that situation. But I do believe that T. Higgins is not going to be a Bengal moving into 2024. All right, let's talk about the last bold prediction that we have in the last couple minutes of the show here. Number 5, Austin Ekeler will finish outside of the top 24 in 2024. A little bit more bolder of a prediction. I don't know what his contract situation with the Chargers is, but I just want to say he's been garbage this season. I went to a football game live, and I had a friend, Rick actually texted me and said, Ekeler isn't good anymore. Have you watched him run and all of this nonsense? And obviously for fantasy football, there's good things for him there because, he is a pass-catching running back. So all you got to do is catch a pass and you get 1 fantasy point. It's easy money. I could catch a pass, maybe just a screen pass, not want to pass the line of scrimmage. I get blown up. But, yeah, they get it to Austin Eckler regularly, and he's one of the better pass-catching running backs in the NFL, but he didn't even have to pass the line of scrimmage. He gets a fantasy point. And if he catches 60, 70 passes and he just has mediocre, to below average totals in terms of what he does on the ground, he still will finish as a top 15, 16 running back in fantasy football if he plays every game. But he looks bad. He looks like he's regressed. He looks like he's not good anymore. And I wanted to bring up some of the numbers here in the second half of the season for Austin Eckler, because this year he finished outside the top 25, but I don't hold that against him because he missed three out of the first 4 games of the season. Had 26 fantasy points week 1, and then weeks 2, 3, and 4 he missed and had his bye week in week 5. So by week 5, people had not had Austin Eckler all season, but we hadn't seen him kind of collapse. After week 5, they went into week 7 and beyond. And I wanted to pull up the numbers for week 7 and beyond for Austin Eckler because things did not go well for him in that second half of the season. Everyone drafted him to be a top 3 to 4 running back in fantasy football. He did not produce as such. Austin Eckler was the RB16 in that stretch of games. He had a 5-point game, 23-point game, 21, 21, 7, 9, 4, 21, 7, 11, 4, averaging 12 points per game and got 136 fantasy points, finishing as the RB16. The even more concerning trend is that in the midway point in the season after he came back from injuries, week 8, 9, and 10, he was really good. After that point, it got worse. From week 11 to 17, Austin Eckler finished all the way down at RB29, averaging 9 fantasy points a game. In those games, he had 7, 9, 4, 21, 7, 11, 4. So I just recited those weeks out to you with weeks 7, 8, 9, and 10 involved. But he fell off a cliff. And it is very concerning to see that, but in my mind, if he goes to another football team, it's going to be like when Todd Gurley left the Rams, or, like when Devonta Freeman left the Falcons, or when, Dalvin Cook left the friggin' Vikings. When the time comes for these guys and they end up getting old and start collapsing a little bit, it happens fast. And so for Austin Eckler, it has started to happen. And I would not be surprised if, age 29 season here, he, in 2024, that this is it for Austin Eckler, that he still provides some sort of a role for a football team, whether it's the Chargers or another team. But it is concerning to see, it's concerning to see a guy like Austin Eckler go the way of the doo-doo and not be good anymore. I do want to see if he's under contract with this team, because he could be a cut candidate as well. A dude that they end up releasing at the end of the year. But I don't see any immediate news for Austin Eckler here. So, player news, let's do that. Yeah, no news for Austin Eckler. But I think if he's under contract, he could be cut. If he's not under contract, things could go in a very negative direction for him next year with the Chargers. And I think the Chargers are going to be looking to move on and try to find somebody else to kind of do that, but to run the ball for them. But yeah, just looking at that stretch of games from week 11 to 17 is the most concerning thing that I've seen from Austin Eckler's career, because that is a trend. And it tells me one of two things. If he ends up finishing in the top 24 next year, I don't want him on my fantasy team, because he could have an early start to the season where he ends up being really good, but by the time he reaches the second half of the season, because of his age, it is going to tail off, and it's going to be similar to what you saw in this stretch of games, which is not good for your fantasy team down the stretch when you're forced to start Austin Eckler. So if you want to draft him and get whatever juice you can out of him early in the season, if he has any left, you can do that. But I think there's definite concerns with Austin Eckler. So he will not finish as a top 24 running back in 2024 fantasy football. It's going to be a tough year for Austin Eckler, and I think you want to avoid him in drafts. There's a couple of guys I'm going to say to avoid in drafts, but he's one of them. So there you go. There are the top 5 guaranteed to be right predictions for 2024. It's been an interesting episode. I hope I get all these right. That would be awesome to go back next year and be like, hey guys, I got them all right. By the way, here we go again. We're going to do another show. So thank you for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. You got something out of it. Please leave a question down below. Comment, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. We'll talk to you later, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.